A nurse approached a millionaire and told him not to go to his meeting. The next morning, there were 2 luxury cars at her small house. The sun filtered through the blinds of the luxurious private hospital, illuminating the room where Andrew Miller, the telecommunications magnate, was preparing to be discharged. At 55, Andrew was the very image of success. Perfectly groomed grey hair, a tanned face, and a smile that radiated confidence. However, the last few weeks had been a living hell for him. A heart attack had caught him in the middle of an important negotiation, forcing him to postpone all his plans. Now, after weeks of recovery, he was ready to take back control of his empire. "Mr. Miller, are you ready to leave?" asked Dr. Ramirez, his primary physician. As he entered the room, Andrew nodded impatiently. "More than ready, doctor. I have a crucial meeting this afternoon and I can't afford to miss it." Dr. Ramirez frowned. "Andrew, you know I recommended resting for at least another week. Your heart is still weak and my heart is fine," Andrew interrupted in a tone that brooked no argument. "I've been cooped up here for weeks. My company needs me." The doctor sighed, knowing it was useless to argue with his stubborn patient. "All right, but promise me you'll take it easy and follow all my instructions." Andrew nodded distractedly as he finished buttoning his designer shirt. His mind was already on the meeting that afternoon, where he would close a multi-million-dollar deal that would change the course of his company. As the businessman signed his discharge papers, a young nurse entered the room. She was beautiful, with long brown hair and green eyes that seemed to hide a secret. Andrew glanced at her, noticing something familiar about her features, but quickly dismissed the thought. "Mr. Miller," the nurse said in a soft but firm voice, "I know it's not my place to say this, but don't go to that meeting this afternoon." Andrew looked at her, surprised. "Excuse me, who are you and why are you telling me this?" The nurse seemed to hesitate for a moment, as if she were struggling with herself. "My name is Laura, and I just know you. Shouldn't go. Please trust me." Before Andrew could respond, the nurse quickly left the room, leaving him confused and slightly irritated. Who did that woman think she was to give him orders? Shaking his head, Andrew finished getting ready and left the hospital, ignoring the mysterious nurse's warning. His driver was waiting for him at the entrance with his luxurious black car. "To the office, Rodrigo," he ordered as he settled into the back seat. "We have a lot of work to do." As the car pulled away from the hospital, Andrew couldn't help but look out the rear window. For a moment, he thought he saw Nurse Laura watching him from a third-floor window, her face a mix of concern and something else, sadness. Andrew shook his head. Dismissing those thoughts, he had more important things to focus on. However, a small voice in the back of his mind kept asking, why did that woman seem so familiar to him? And more importantly, why had she warned him not to go to the meeting? As the car disappeared into the city's traffic, Andrew couldn't imagine how that simple warning would change the course of his life forever. The skyscraper that housed Miller Telecommunications headquarters stood tall in the heart of the city's financial district. Andrew Miller entered the lobby with a determined stride, ignoring the surprised looks from employees who didn't expect to see him so soon. "Welcome back, Mr. Miller," greeted his assistant Martha, a middle-aged woman with thick-rimmed glasses and a notepad always at hand. "The board is waiting for you in the conference room." Andrew nodded curtly. "Thank you, Martha. Prepare the Phoenix project documents. I'll need them for the meeting." As he ascended in the private elevator to the top floor, Andrew couldn't help but think about the nurse's warning. Why had she told him not to attend this meeting? Shaking his head, he dismissed those thoughts. He had more important matters to attend to. The boardroom was full when he entered. The board members stood up, some with genuine smiles, others with more cautious expressions. "Andrew, what a surprise to see you so soon," said Richard Green, the company's vice president and a close friend of Andrew. "Are you sure you should be here?" "I'm perfectly fine, Richard," Andrew replied with a forced smile. "Now, can we begin?" The meeting proceeded normally. For the first hour, Andrew presented the Phoenix project, an innovative communications platform that would revolutionize the market. The board members listened attentively, occasionally asking questions. However, as the meeting progressed, Andrew began to notice something strange. Furtive glances exchanged between some board members, barely audible whispers, a tension in the air he couldn't explain. It was then that he noticed in the middle of his presentation, he saw Richard discreetly slide a document to another board member. The paper bore a seal Andrew recognized immediately. It was the logo of his main competitor, Global Communications. Suddenly, the nurse's words echoed in his mind. Was this what she meant? Was there a conspiracy underway? Andrew continued his presentation, but his mind raced. He observed more carefully, noticing details he had previously overlooked, the way some members avoided his gaze, the poorly disguised nervousness of others. When the meeting finally ended, Andrew felt exhausted and confused. Something was definitely wrong, but he couldn't pinpoint what it was. "Excellent presentation, Andrew," said Richard, approaching with a smile that didn't reach his eyes. "We should celebrate your return. How about dinner tomorrow at my house?" Andrew nodded, distractedly, his mind still reeling. "Sure, Richard. Tomorrow." He left the boardroom feeling as though he had aged 10 years in the last few hours. The nurse Laura's words kept echoing in his head. How could she have known something was wrong? Determined to get to the bottom of it, Andrew headed to his office. He needed to review some documents, make some calls. Something wasn't right, and he was determined to find out what it was. As he sat at his desk, he couldn't shake the feeling that he had just entered a dangerous game, one where he didn't know all the rules. Laura's warning had been just the beginning. Now Andrew Miller faced a mystery that threatened to destroy everything he had built. And somewhere in the city, a young nurse named Laura looked out the window of her small apartment, wondering if she had done the right thing by warning a man she didn't know, but who, nonetheless, seemed strangely familiar to her. The sun set over the city as Andrew Miller entered his luxurious mansion. The day had been exhausting, both physically and emotionally, and all he wanted was a whiskey and the peace of his study. However, fate had other plans for him. Mr. Miller greeted Maria, his housekeeper of more than 2 decades. "A package arrived for you this afternoon. I left it in your study, as always." Andrew frowned. He wasn't expecting any package. With a sense of foreboding, he headed to his study, an elegant space filled with books and memorabilia from A Successful Life. On the mahogany desk, a manila envelope awaited. With trembling hands, Andrew opened the envelope. Its contents took his breath away. Internal company documents, confidential emails, even transcripts of phone calls. All pointed to one thing, a conspiracy against him, orchestrated by some members of his own board. "Impossible," he murmured, flipping through the pages frantically. There it was, plans to sell, confidential information to the competition, strategies to weaken his position in the company, even discussions about how to leverage his recent health scare to force his retirement. Among the conspirators, one name stood out: Richard Green, his friend and confidant for years. The betrayal hit him like a punch to the gut. Andrew collapsed into his chair, his head spinning. How had he not seen this coming? Who had sent these documents? And then, like a bolt of lightning, he remembered. The nurse, Laura. She had tried to warn him. Without a second thought, Andrew picked up his phone and called the hospital. "Good evening. I need to speak with a nurse named Laura," he said urgently. "She worked on my floor when I was admitted." There was a pause on the other end of the line. "I'm sorry, sir, but we don't have any nurse named Laura that matches that description." Andrew felt the ground give way beneath him. Who was that woman really? And why had she risked warning him? Determined to find answers, Andrew spent the next few hours investigating. He used all his contacts, moved heaven and earth, until he finally obtained an address. It was nearly midnight when he arrived at the modest apartment building where Laura supposedly lived. He climbed the stairs with his heart pounding, not knowing what to expect. He knocked on the door of apartment 3B. Seconds that felt like an eternity passed until the door opened, revealing the same young woman he had seen at the hospital. "Mr. Miller," Laura said, surprised but not entirely. "I was expecting you." Andrew looked at her intently, searching her face for something that would explain the familiarity he felt. "Who are you, really? And how did you know about the meeting?" Laura sighed deeply. as if she were about to reveal a long-held secret. "Please come in. It's a long story, and I think we'll both need to sit down for this." Andrew entered the small apartment. Noticing the photos on the walls, one in particular caught his attention. A young woman who looked remarkably like Laura, but whom Andrew recognized immediately. "That's," he began, unable to finish the sentence. "My mother," Laura completed, "and your ex-girlfriend, Carmen Davis." Andrew felt the world stop. Carmen, his first love, the woman he thought had died more than 2 decades ago. And in front of him, a young woman who was her spitting image. I am her daughter," Laura said, her voice trembling. "And you, Andrew Miller, are my father." The silence that followed, that revelation, was deafening. Andrew looked at Laura, seeing for the first time the features she had inherited from him. The shape of her nose, the determination in her eyes, everything fit, and yet nothing made sense. But how? He finally managed to say, "Carmen died 22 years ago. I attended her funeral myself." Laura shook her head. "That's what my grandmother wanted you to believe. The truth is much more complicated, and I'm afraid it is connected to the conspiracy you are facing now." Andrew sat down, feeling the weight of the revelations crushing him. His world, which he believed to be so solid and controlled, was falling apart before his eyes. "Tell me everything," he said finally, bracing himself for a story that would change his life forever. And as Laura began to unravel the secrets of the past, outside in the city streets, shadows moved. The conspiracy against Andrew Miller was in full swing, and no one could foresee the consequences it would have for everyone involved. Laura's small apartment became the setting for a story that seemed straight out of a novel. Andrew listened, astonished, as his newly discovered daughter unraveled the secrets of the past. "My grandmother, Eleanor Davis, never approved of your relationship with my mother," began Laura, her green eyes shining with a mixture of sadness and determination. "She believed you would ruin Carmen's life, that you would take her away from her dreams of becoming a doctor." Andrew nodded slowly, remembering Eleanor's cold looks and cutting comments. "She never liked me, but to go so far as to fake her own daughter's death," Laura continued. "When my mother became pregnant, Eleanor saw her opportunity. She convinced Mom that you had abandoned her, that you had left with another woman. At the same time, she made you believe that she had died in an accident." Andrew stood up abruptly, unable to contain his indignation. "That's impossible. I loved Carmen. I would never have abandoned her. And her death, I was at her funeral. I saw her body. A body you never saw up close," Laura interrupted gently. "Grandmother Eleanor arranged everything. The closed casket, the false witnesses, even forged documents. She was a woman with many contacts and resources." Andrew ran a hand over his face, trying to comprehend the magnitude of the lie that had defined the last 22 years of his life. And Carmen, how could she believe that I would abandon her? Laura pulled a box from under the sofa and extracted a bundle of letters tied with a faded ribbon. Grandmother intercepted all communication. "Look, these are the letters you wrote to Mom after her supposed death. Letters she never received." With trembling hands, Andrew took the letters. He recognized his own handwriting, younger and desperate, declaring his eternal love to a woman he believed lost forever. "Your mother. Where is she now?" he asked, fearing the answer. Laura lowered her gaze. "Mom died 5 years ago, cancer. In her final days, she told me everything and asked me to find you. But by then, you were already a powerful and unreachable man. It took me years to gather the courage to approach you." Andrew felt his heart break for the second time. He had lost Carmen twice, once to a lie and once to the cruel fate. "And how did you know about the conspiracy in my company?" he asked, suddenly remembering the original reason for his visit. Laura smiled sadly. "That was almost by accident. I got a job at the hospital, hoping to have the opportunity to meet you. One day, I overheard Richard Green talking on the phone in the hallway. He mentioned plans to get rid of Andrew and take advantage of your convalescence. I didn't know the details, but I knew I had to warn you." Andrew sank into the sofa, overwhelmed by the revelations. His mind was a whirlwind of emotions. Pain from Losing Carmen, anger towards Eleanor, confusion over Richard's betrayal, and a strange mix of joy and fear over Laura's existence. "There's something else you need to know," Laura said, pulling a flash drive from her pocket. "After overhearing Richard, I did some investigating on my own. Here are the conspiracy's details, emails, recordings. I believe they plan to sell the company behind your back." Andrew took the flash drive, feeling its weight as if it were a bomb about to explode. "Laura, I don't know what to say. You've risked so much to help me, to tell me the truth." Laura approached timidly and, for the first time, took Andrew's hand. "You're my father. Despite everything, somehow I always knew. And now that I've found you, I don't intend to lose you again." Andrew looked into his daughter's eyes, seeing in them the reflection of the woman he once loved and of himself. In that moment, he made a decision. "We'll face this together," he said with determination. "Let's expose this conspiracy, and then we'll have time to get to know each other, to be the family we were robbed of." Laura smiled, her eyes shining with unshed tears. "That sounds perfect, Dad." That word, so simple yet so powerful, sealed a pact between father and daughter. As the night advanced, they delved into the documents and evidence, crafting a plan to confront the conspirators. What neither of them knew was that at that very moment, Richard Green and his accomplices were accelerating their plans. The battle for the future of Miller Telecommunications was about to begin, and the stakes were higher than anyone could imagine. The next few days were a whirlwind of activity for Andrew and Laura. Father and daughter worked tirelessly, analyzing every document, every email, every clue that could help them expose the conspiracy. Andrew moved cautiously within the company, feigning ignorance while carefully observing his supposed allies. Richard Green, in particular, seemed increasingly nervous, casting furtive glances and having hushed conversations that abruptly ended when Andrew approached one afternoon. While reviewing the evidence in Laura's apartment, Andrew had an epiphany. "The Phoenix Project," he murmured, flipping through some documents. "It's not just a new communications platform, it's the key to everything." Laura looked at him, intrigued. "What do you mean?" Andrew spread several papers on the table. "Phoenix isn't just an upgrade, it's a paradigm shift. If it works as we've designed, it will revolutionize the entire industry, and that means that it would be worth a fortune to the competition." Laura finished, suddenly understanding. "You think they plan to sell the technology?" Andrew nodded gravely. "Not just the technology, I believe they plan to sell the entire company with Phoenix as the crown jewel, and I bet Global Communications is the buyer." With this new perspective, father and daughter redoubled their efforts. Laura, using her considerable computer skills, which Andrew discovered with pride, managed to access encrypted emails that confirmed their suspicions. "Look at this," said Laura one night, pointing to her screen. "They've scheduled a secret meeting for 3 days from now. All the conspirators will be there, including the CEO of Global Communications." Andrew smiled for the first time in days. "Perfect, that's where we'll catch them." The plan they devised was risky, but potentially devastating for the conspirators. Andrew would announce a surprise press conference coinciding with the secret meeting. Meanwhile, Laura would infiltrate the meeting location to obtain definitive proof. The night before the operation, Andrew and Laura had dinner together at the Miller mansion. It was the first time Laura visited her father's home, and she couldn't help but feel overwhelmed by the opulence surrounding her. "You know," said Andrew while serving the wine, "I never thought I would feel the joy of sharing a family meal here again. Thank you, Laura, for giving me that back." Laura smiled, touched. "I never imagined I would ever meet my father. It's like destiny has given us a second chance." As they dined, the conversation flowed naturally. Andrew recounted stories of his youth with Carmen, and Laura shared anecdotes from her childhood. For a moment, the weight of the conspiracy and the secrets of the past disappeared, leaving only the warm glow of a newly reunited family. However, the reality of their situation soon returned. As they finished dessert, Andrew's phone rang. It was a text message from Richard. "Andrew, we need to talk. It's urgent tomorrow, 10 a.m. in my office." Andrew showed the message to Laura. It seems they suspect something. We'll have to be even more careful tomorrow. Laura nodded, her expression becoming serious. I'll be ready. No matter what happens, Dad, we'll face this together. That night, while Laura slept in one of the guest rooms, Andrew stayed up in his study, looking at old photographs of Carmen. I promise, he whispered to the smiling image of his first love, that I will protect our daughter and seek justice for everything that was done to us. The next morning dawned grey and rainy, as if the weather sensed the storm about to break over Miller Telecommunications. Andrew arrived at the office early, mentally preparing for his meeting with Richard. At exactly 10 a.m., Andrew entered his old friend and now traitor's office. Richard greeted him with a tense smile, his eyes revealing a mix of nervousness and determination. Andrew, I'm glad you came, Richard began, offering him a seat. There is something important we need to discuss. Andrew sat down, maintaining a neutral expression. I'm listening, Richard. Richard cleared his throat. You see, some of the board members and I have been considering the company's future. Given your recent health issue, we believe it might be the right time to consider new directions. New directions? Andrew asked, feigning ignorance. What exactly do you have in mind? Richard leaned forward, lowering his voice. We've received a buyout offer, Andrew. A very generous offer from Global Communications. I think we should seriously consider it. Andrew felt the anger boiling inside him but kept his composure. Interesting. And I suppose this offer includes the Phoenix project? Richard blinked, surprised by the direct mention of the project. Well, yes, in fact, Phoenix is a significant part of the negotiation. I see, said Andrew, standing up slowly. Thank you for sharing this with me, Richard. I'll consider it carefully. As he left the office, Andrew could feel Richard's eyes on his back. He knew time was running out. The counterattack had to start now. Meanwhile, Laura was preparing for her part of the plan. Dressed in an elegant suit and carrying a fake ID, she headed to the hotel where the secret meeting was to take place. Her heart pounded, aware of the risks but determined to help her father and uncover the truth. At 3 p.m., Andrew called a surprise press conference. Journalists quickly filled the Miller Telecommunications conference room. Intrigued by the sudden announcement, "Ladies and gentlemen," Andrew began, his voice firm and determined, "I've gathered you here today to make an important announcement about the future of our company." At that very moment, in a suite at the Ritz Hotel, Laura managed to infiltrate the secret meeting, posing as an assistant. With a hidden device, she began recording the incriminating conversation between the conspirators and the Global Communications executives. Back at the press conference, Andrew continued, "In recent days, I have uncovered a plot within our own company. A group of individuals, including some of our board members, have been conspiring to sell Miller Telecommunications to our main competitor, Global Communications." A murmur of astonishment swept through. The room camera flashes fired rapidly as Andrew revealed the conspiracy details, presenting irrefutable evidence. At the hotel, Laura listened in horror as the conspirators discussed the final details of the sale, unaware that Andrew was exposing their plans at that very moment. "And now," Andrew said, reaching the climax of his presentation, "I have live proof of this conspiracy. At this moment, the traitors are meeting at the Ritz Hotel, closing the deal with Global Communications." With a dramatic gesture, Andrew activated a giant screen behind him. To the astonishment of everyone present, a live feed from the hotel suite appeared, clearly showing Richard Green and other board members in the midst of negotiations with Global Communications executives. The room erupted into chaos with questions and exclamations. Andrew, with a calm that belied the emotional storm, inside him concluded, "As you can see, we have unmasked this betrayal. Effective immediately, all those involved are suspended from their positions and will face the legal consequences of their actions." As journalists clamored for more answers, Andrew saw Laura enter the room discreetly, nodding to confirm that the mission had been a success. Father and daughter exchanged a look of triumph and relief. The conspiracy had been dismantled, but for Andrew and Laura, this was only the beginning. Now they would have to face the consequences of their actions and, more importantly, start building the family relationship that had been denied to them for so long. The days following the explosive press conference were a whirlwind of activity. Miller Telecommunications was plunged into chaos as internal and external investigations took place. Richard Green and the other conspirators were arrested, and the media couldn't stop talking about the scandal. Andrew, for his part, found himself in the eye of the storm. Between emergency meetings with the board, interviews with investigators, and press conferences, he barely had time to breathe. However, in every free moment, his thoughts returned to Laura and the incredible series of events that had brought them together. A week after the incident, Andrew finally managed to take a break. He invited Laura to dinner at his mansion, determined to spend time with his newly discovered daughter, away from the chaos of the outside world. As they dined in the luxurious dining room, Andrew couldn't help but notice how much Laura resembled Carmen. The way she tilted her head when she was thoughtful, the spark of determination in her eyes, even her laugh, everything reminded him of the woman he had loved so many years ago. "You know," Andrew said, breaking a comfortable silence, "I still find it hard to believe you're here, that you're real." Laura smiled, a little shyly. "I find it hard to believe too sometimes. For years, I imagined what it would be like to meet you, but the reality, it's so much better than I ever dreamed." Andrew felt a lump form in his throat. "Laura, I want you to know that I'm deeply sorry I wasn't there for you all these years. If I had known—" "It wasn't your fault," Laura interrupted gently. "We were victims of circumstances and the actions of others. What's important is that we're here now, together." Andrew nodded, grateful for his daughter's understanding. "You're right. And I promise that, from now on, I will be here for you for whatever you need." The conversation flowed naturally after that. They talked about Laura's childhood, her nursing, studies, her dreams and aspirations. Andrew listened intently to every word, trying to make up for the lost years. Then Laura mentioned something that caught Andrew's attention. "You know," she said, playing with her dessert, "there's something I haven't told you about Grandma Eleanor." Andrew tensed at the mention of that name. "What is it?" Laura took a deep breath before continuing. "A few months ago, just before I decided to reach out to you, I received a letter from Grandma Eleanor." Andrew leaned forward, his curiosity piqued. "A letter? I thought she had died years ago." Laura shook her head. "That's what Mom and I thought too, but apparently Grandma has been alive all this time, living under a false name in South America." "What did the letter say?" Andrew asked, his voice tense. Laura pulled a crumpled envelope from her purse and handed it to her father. "I think you should read it yourself." With trembling hands, Andrew opened the envelope and began to read. "Dear Laura, if you are reading this, it means I have finally gathered the courage to face the mistakes of my past. I know I don't deserve your forgiveness, nor that of your mother, and certainly not that of Andrew. But before my time in this world ends, I feel I must explain my actions. More than 2 decades ago, I made the biggest mistake of my life by separating your parents. At the time, I believed I was protecting Carmen, but I was terribly wrong. As the years passed, I saw how my lie destroyed not only the happiness of Carmen and Andrew, but also yours, my dear granddaughter. The weight of this guilt has haunted me every day since recently. I learned of the conspiracy against Andrew and his company. Using my old contacts, I managed to obtain crucial information about Richard Green's plans and his accomplices. This information is included on a USB drive attached to this letter. I know this does not make up for the damage I have caused, but I hope it can serve to protect Andrew and perhaps open a path for you two to reunite. Laura, my last wish is that you find your father and tell him the truth, and if by some miracle he reads these words. Andrew, I am deeply sorry. I hope you can find in your heart, if not forgiveness, at least the understanding that my actions, though terribly wrong, came from a place of misguided love. With all my regret and love, Eleanor Davis." Andrew let the letter fall, his mind a whirlwind of emotions. Anger, pain, confusion, and surprisingly, a hint of understanding fought to dominate his thoughts. "When did you receive this?" he finally asked, his voice barely a whisper. 3 months ago, Laura replied. "It was what finally pushed me to find you. The information on the USB drive was crucial in exposing the conspiracy. Andrew stood up from the table and walked to the window, staring at the night sky. All these years, all the pain, the loss, and now this. Laura approached her father and timidly placed a hand on his shoulder. I know it's a lot to process, but I think Grandma, in her twisted way, finally tried to do the right thing. Andrew turned to his daughter, his eyes shining with unshed tears. Laura, I don't know if I can ever fully forgive Eleanor for what she did, but I am grateful that her final actions brought us together. Father and daughter embraced, a moment of connection that had taken decades to arrive. When they finally parted, Andrew had a look of determination on his face. I think it's time we take a trip, he said. We need to find Eleanor and close this chapter once and for all. Laura nodded, a mix of anticipation and nervousness on her face. Are you sure you're ready to face her? Andrew took his daughter's hands in his. With you by my side, I'm ready to face anything. As they made plans for their trip to South America, neither of them could imagine the surprises that still awaited them. The search for Eleanor Davis would not only reveal more secrets of the past, but also test their newly formed bond in ways they never expected. Andrew Miller's private jet landed smoothly at Buenos Aires International Airport under a clear spring sky. Laura, who had never flown on a private jet before, still felt a bit dizzy from the luxury and speed of the trip. Are you okay? Andrew asked, noticing his daughter's pallor. Laura nodded, forcing a smile. Yes, just a bit overwhelmed. All of this, it's very different from what I'm used to. Andrew looked at her with a mix of guilt and affection. I'm sorry, I should have considered that. I promise we'll try to keep a lower profile during our stay here. As they headed into the city in a discreet rental car, Andrew couldn't help but notice how Laura observed everything with wide-eyed wonder. Buenos Aires, with its mix of European architecture and Latin American energy, was a spectacle for someone who had never left her country. Before they stayed at a boutique hotel in the Palermo neighborhood, away from the hustle and bustle of downtown once settled. They spread out all the documents they had about Eleanor on the dining table. The letter, the USB with the information, and the results of the private investigation Andrew had commissioned. According to this, Laura said, reviewing some papers, Grandma has been living under the name Eleanor Gomez in a small town outside the city. Andrew frowned. Why would she choose to live so close to a big city if she wanted to hide? Maybe, Laura reflected, part of her wanted to be found. The next day, father and daughter headed to the town indicated in the documents. It was a picturesque place with colonial houses and cobblestone streets. The locals looked at them with curiosity, unaccustomed to seeing outsiders. After asking around in several places, they finally arrived at a small house on the outskirts of town. The garden, though neglected, showed signs of having been beautiful once. With his heart pounding, Andrew knocked on the door. Moments that seemed like an eternity passed before they heard slow footsteps approaching. The door opened, revealing an older woman with white hair and a wrinkled face, but with eyes that still shone with intelligence. Eleanor Davis, or Elena Gomez as she now called herself, looked at them with a mix of surprise and resignation. I knew this day would come, she said in a tired voice. Come in, we have much to talk about. Once inside, seated in a modestly furnished living room, the silence became almost tangible. It was Eleanor who finally broke it. Andrew, she began, her voice trembling slightly, I know there are no words that can make up for the harm I've caused, but I want you to know that every day of the last 22 years, I've lived with the weight of my mistake. Andrew, who had imagined this moment thousands of times, found himself at a loss for words. It was Laura who spoke. Grandma, she said, her voice soft but firm. Why? Why keep the lie for so long? Eleanor closed her eyes, as if the weight of her actions was too much to bear. At first it was pride. I believed I was protecting Carmen, but over time it was fear. Fear of facing the consequences, fear of losing my daughter and granddaughter. And Mom? Laura asked. Did she never know the truth? Eleanor shook her head. Carmen discovered part of the truth shortly before she died. It was then that I exiled myself here. I couldn't face her pain, her disappointment. Andrew, who had remained silent, finally spoke. His voice was low, restrained, but filled with emotion. You took everything from us, Eleanor, years we will never get back, moments we will never live. How could you be so selfish? Eleanor didn't try to defend herself. Silent tears ran down her cheeks. I don't expect your forgiveness, Andrew. I just wanted you to know the truth before it was too late. It was then that Eleanor slowly got up and walked to an old desk in the corner of the room. From one of the drawers, she pulled out a thick manila envelope. This, she said, handing it to Andrew, is everything I kept from you both over the years. Letters, photographs, newspaper clippings. I hope they can help you recover some of what you lost. Andrew took the envelope with trembling hands. Laura approached him, placing a supportive hand on his shoulder. As father and daughter began to explore the contents of the envelope, discovering fragments of a life that could have been, Eleanor watched them in silence. At that moment, all three understood that while the past couldn't be changed, the future was still unwritten. The visit to Eleanor had brought answers, but also new questions. Could Andrew and Laura truly forgive? How would this revelation affect their newly formed relationship? And more importantly, what would they do with the knowledge they now possessed? As the sun set over the small Argentine town, the Miller Davis family faced an uncertain future, but one filled with possibilities. The flight back home was quiet. Both Andrew and Laura were lost in their thoughts, processing everything they had discovered in Argentina. The envelope Eleanor had given them rested between them, a bittersweet treasure of memories and lost possibilities. When they finally landed, it was night. The city lights shone like fallen stars, a reminder that life continued, indifferent to the personal dramas unfolding within it. Laura, Andrew said as they headed to the airport exit, I know it's been an intense trip. Would you like to stay at my house tonight? We could go through the envelope together. Laura nodded, grateful. I'd love that, Dad. That word, Dad, still sounded strange on her lips. But every time she said it, she felt another piece of her life's puzzle fall into place. Back at the Miller mansion, father and daughter settled in the cozy. Study Maria, the housekeeper, brought them tea and cookies before discreetly withdrawing, sensing the importance of the moment. With trembling hands, Andrew opened the envelope. The first thing he pulled out was a somewhat faded photograph. In it, a young Carmen smiled at the camera, her belly slightly swollen under a summer dress. That must be my mother when she was pregnant with me, Laura whispered, touching the image reverently. Andrew nodded, unable to speak. Seeing Carmen, young and radiant, knowing he had never been able to share those moments with her, broke his heart. They continued exploring the envelope's contents. Undelivered love letters, newspaper clippings about Andrew's business successes, even a small lock of blonde hair that could only belong to Laura as a baby. As the night wore on, father and daughter pieced together their family's story, filling in the gaps with each new piece of information. They laughed, cried, and slowly began to heal. When the sun started to rise on the horizon, Andrew and Laura found themselves sitting on the balcony, watching the sunrise. You know, Andrew said, breaking the comfortable silence, for years I thought my legacy would be Miller Telecommunications. I believed that was the most important thing I would leave in this world. But now... Now what? Laura asked softly. Andrew looked at her, his eyes shining with a mixture of love and determination. Now I know my true legacy is you, Laura, and I want to spend the rest of my life being the father I should have always been. Laura felt tears welling up in her eyes. Dad, I don't know what to say. You don't have to say anything, Andrew replied, taking her hand. Just promise me you'll give me the chance to be a part of your life, to really get to know you. Laura nodded, squeezing her father's hand. I promise. In that moment, as the sun rose in the sky, illuminating the city waking up, Andrew Miller made a decision. Laura, he said, I've been thinking I want to do something meaningful with everything we've learned. How would you feel about creating a foundation? We could help reunite separated families, offer scholarships to nursing students in your mother's honor." Laura's eyes lit up. "That would be wonderful, Dad. And maybe could we include a program to help elderly people like Grandma Eleanor, people who have made mistakes but seek redemption?" Andrew smiled, surprised and proud of his daughter's compassion. "That's an excellent idea, Laura. I think your mother would be very proud of you." As the day advanced, father and daughter began sketching out plans for their new foundation. They decided to call it New Dawn Foundation. In honor of the moment, they decided to create something positive from their painful history. As they worked, Andrew couldn't help but notice how Laura had inherited not only Carmen's compassion, but also her sharp intelligence and organizational skills. He found himself imagining what it would have been like to watch his daughter grow up, and although the pain of that loss would never completely disappear, he took comfort in knowing they had a future ahead of them. In the weeks that followed, news of the Millers' new foundation spread quickly. The media, still processing the scandal at Miller Telecommunications, pounced on this new story. Andrew and Laura found themselves in the spotlight once again, but this time for positive reasons. The inauguration of the New Dawn Foundation was an emotional event. Andrew and Laura shared their story publicly for the first time, moving the audience with their tale of loss, rediscovery, and hope. "Our story," Andrew said in his speech, "is one of second chances. It taught us that it is never too late to right the wrongs of the past, to build bridges and rebuild what was thought lost. It is our hope that this foundation can offer that same opportunity to others." Laura, standing beside her father, added, "We also want to honor the memory of Carmen Davis, a woman whose love transcended even the hardest barriers. Her spirit of care and compassion will live on through every life we touch with this foundation." Among the audience, familiar and new faces mixed. There were Andrew's former employees, proud to see their boss in this new chapter of his life. There were also nurses and doctors from the hospital where Laura had worked, excited to see how their colleague was using her new position to do good. And in the last row, almost hidden among the crowd, a familiar figure watched everything with tears in her eyes. Eleanor Davis, who had traveled secretly from Argentina, watched with a mix of regret and pride how her granddaughter and the man she once separated from her daughter were united, creating something beautiful from the pain she had caused. When the ceremony ended and people began to disperse, Eleanor timidly approached Andrew and Laura. I didn't know if I would be welcome," she said with a trembling voice. "But I had to come. I had to see this with my own eyes." Laura was the first to react, hugging her grandmother tightly. "I'm glad you're here," she whispered. Andrew, after a moment of hesitation, extended his hand to Eleanor. "Thank you for coming," he said simply. It wasn't forgiveness, not yet, but it was a start. That night, as the city sank into darkness, Andrew found himself on the balcony of his mansion once more. Laura joined him, both contemplating the city lights in comfortable silence. "You know," Laura said finally, "Mom used to tell me that the stars are the souls of our loved ones, watching over us." Andrew smiled, his eyes shining with unshed tears. "Your mother was always a romantic, but I like to think she's right, that somehow she's here with us, watching what we've accomplished." "She is," Laura affirmed with conviction. I can feel her father and daughter remained silent for a moment longer, each lost in their thoughts. Finally, Andrew spoke. "Laura, I know I can't get back the years we lost, but I want you to know that no matter what happens, I'll always be here for you. You are the most important thing in my life." Laura rested her head on her father's shoulder. "I know, Dad, and you're the most important thing to me. I'm grateful that, despite everything, we found our way back to each other." As the night advanced, Andrew and Laura Miller remained together, contemplating the future with hope and determination. They knew the road ahead wouldn't be easy, that there would still be obstacles to overcome and wounds to heal. But they also knew that as long as they had each other, they could face any challenge life threw at them. And somewhere, beyond the stars, Carmen Davis smiled, knowing that her love had triumphed over all adversity, finally uniting the family she had always dreamed of having.